Opening a restaurant in two different European nations reveals a stark contrast. In Estonia's digital-first system, you need exactly 2 authorizations. In France, you need an average of 7, requiring compliance across overlapping regional and national layers before an entrepreneur can even open. Europe built its post-war prosperity on a foundation of citizen protection. The original goal was to ensure fair labor and carefully regulate markets to maintain the highest living standards in the world. As these regulatory layers have accumulated over the decades, they have slowly begun to function as a rigid ceiling for economic growth. According to the Letter Report, what began as a tool for protection now frequently acts as a barrier to expansion, where a local business's primary obstacle is no longer the market, but the paperwork required to enter it. To understand where this friction originates, you have to look at the highest levels of European governance in Brussels and Strasbourg. This visualization tracks legislative output between 2019 and 2024. Over those 5 years, the U.S. Congress adopted roughly 3,500 acts. The European Union produced approximately 13,000. This discrepancy reflects 2 distinct approaches to economic management. While the U.S. system focuses on broad federal standards, the EU has adopted a model based on high-volume, granular intervention. The result is what critics call the normative millefeuille, a complex bureaucratic system where new directives and regulations constantly stack directly on top of the old ones, while the mechanism for removing obsolete rules remains largely unused. While global competitors are rapidly financing and building new industries, Europe's legislative output suggests a continent attempting to regulate its way through an economic transition. The European legislative machine is built on mandatory consultations and compromises negotiated between 27 member states. Because of this structure, it takes an average of 19 months for a single European law to navigate from the Commission's initial proposal to final adoption. In the time it takes Brussels to agree on a text, countries like China can decide, fund, and adjust major industrial policies in a matter of weeks. By the time many European laws take effect, the market conditions they were meant to address have already shifted. Then comes gold plating. When member states transpose these directives into national law, domestic governments often add their own requirements and restrictions on top of the original European text. France provides a clear example of this stacking effect, currently enforcing roughly 400,000 active norms. By the time a regulation reaches a local business, it has passed through enough asynchronous layers to arrive bloated and often contradictory. We saw the limits of this system with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD. The intent was transparency regarding environmental impact. However, the initial execution required hundreds of mandatory data points and audits that buried supply chains and smaller subcontractors in compliance costs they were not equipped to handle. In 2025, the administrative system reached a point of saturation. Alarms from major industrial member states forced authorities into an emergency rollback of the rules they had just passed. This graph shows the adjustment. The Commission sharply raised the thresholds, exempting thousands of smaller businesses from the reporting net. The CSRD now primarily targets firms with at least 1,000 employees and €450 million in revenue. The related corporate vigilance duty was similarly adjusted to target only firms with 5,000 employees and €1.5 billion in revenue. This sequence, legislating an idealistic standard and then correcting for economic reality years later, strains regulatory predictability. It leaves businesses unable to plan long-term investments with confidence in the rules. This bureaucratic complexity creates a significant opportunity cost for European industry. According to the Competitiveness Compass, regulatory compliance represents between 1.8 and 2.5% of a firm's revenue. That is capital diverted away from innovation and research. The European Commission has acknowledged this as a structural crisis, making simplification a core pillar of its mandate through 2029. This chart outlines the target, a reduction of €37.5 billion in recurring administrative costs by the year 2029. Setting a multi-billion euro reduction target is an official admission that the volume of regulation has transitioned from a tool of organization to a significant economic liability. Solving this crisis requires a focus on the mechanism of governance rather than a simple removal of protections. One proposal is the 28th regime, an optional, unified European legal framework. This would allow a company in Leuven to follow the same rules as one in Helsinki, bypassing the conflicting layers of national gold plating. This approach prioritizes assessing real-world outcomes over demanding strict procedural compliance for its own sake. Success depends on a reversal of the state's starting assumption. It requires shifting from a model of constant oversight to one that trusts the initiative of economic actors. By dismantling the normative millefeuille and replacing micromanagement with predictable frameworks, Europe can stop absorbing its own energy and paperwork and let the continent build again.